Hey there folks, and welcome to the channel. Today we're looking at setting up a home music studio, and whether you're a beginner or just trying to get your head round how to connect everything, then stick around and hopefully this will point you in the right direction. My previous videos on MIDI audio and USB connections have received over 100,000 views, and in those I used my current studio setup to show how everything's connected and what's possible. But it can be a little confusing, so today we're going to start small and build it up from there. There are many ways that you can set up and connect a home music studio and many different pieces of gear that you could use. But the way I see it, there are three basic types, and today I'm going to be focusing on a keyboard synthesizer focused studio setup, but other instruments could easily be added into this mix. Number one is a DAW setup, basically a computer based setup that doesn't use any hardware instruments. For those new to this, DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation, which is a software application that allows you to record, edit and produce audio. And there are many different DAWs to choose from, like Cubase, Logic Pro, Ableton or Reaper, for example. Number two is a DAWless setup that doesn't use a computer at all and is based around interconnected hardware. And number three is a hybrid setup where you're using a mix of hardware and software that can be used with or without a computer, dependent on your needs or your mood. First, let's look at a simple computer only or DAW setup. In reality, this is all you need to get started making music. A computer running a DAW such as Cubase with some VST instrument plugins, a MIDI keyboard or controller, an audio interface and something to listen on like monitors or headphones. Oh, and a mic for singing if you want. The MIDI controller connects to the computer by USB, allowing you to play and record the software instruments in your DAW. The computer then connects to the audio interface and sends all the audio to it via USB. The microphone then connects to the audio interface and its audio can be recorded back into the computer over the USB connection. Then finally the outputs of the audio interface would run via audio cables to your monitors so that you can hear your synths and singing, either live or the recorded playback from your computer. You can also just plug your headphones into the relevant socket. And that is your little home music studio fully connected. The advantage of a setup like this is it requires minimal equipment and is the most budget friendly. For example, MIDI keyboards are cheaper than fully fledged synthesizers. There are loads of free VST instrument plugins, with many DAWs coming with their own built-in instruments, and audio interfaces can be cheaper than mixers. Next, let's look at a DAWless setup, taking the computer out of the equation. Here I'm basing the setup on a drum machine, a polysynth and a monosynth, as I feel these are the three types of synths you need as a minimum if you're just using hardware. In addition, you'll need a mixer and of course something to listen on. The hardware synths are connected via MIDI cables, enabling them to communicate. In this setup, I have the drum machine at the start and it acts as the master clock, sending its clock signal or tempo out to the other synths so that their arpeggiators and or sequencers are all synced and play in time. The other synths will have settings on how they respond to incoming clock signals, and I'll be doing a more detailed video on that in the future. You'll also see I'm using the through port to connect the second and third synths together. But don't worry if your synths don't have through ports, you can use a through box. And indeed, if you have more than a few synths, then a through box would be the preferred option. The synths then connect from their audio outputs to the mixer's inputs, and the microphone also connects to the mixer. Indeed, if you have other instruments like electric guitars or a mic'd up drum kit, these could also feed into the mixer. Finally, the outputs of the mixer run to the monitors and or headphones so that you can hear everything. And that is everything connected in a simple DAWless setup. However, to give greater control, you may want to add some sort of master controller or sequencer. For example, if your synths have no built-in sequencers, or indeed they're desktop modules with no keyboard. So you could go with something like a KeyStep Pro that allows you to sequence up to 4 synths individually on 4 separate tracks. You'll see here that I've also added in a through box to send the MIDI signals out to the other synths, as this would be preferable than extending the chain from the previous diagram and will provide more reliable communication. All the audio connections stay the same, as here we're only changing the MIDI connections. Remember though, if you're controlling multiple synths by a master controller, to set the synths to different MIDI channels so that you can control them all individually. Pretty much all drum machines come factory defaulted to channel 10 and synths to channel 1, with all gear having some way of changing its channel settings, and I'll be doing a more detailed video on that as well in the near future. You could also go with something like a Novation Circuit Tracks that has 8 tracks with 2 built-in synth tracks, 2 MIDI tracks to control external synthesizers and 4 drum tracks, but you could ignore its internal sounds and use it to sequence up to 8 synthesizers simultaneously if you wanted. There would be a few ways to connect this. Here I've shown the audio outputs of the circuit tracks going to the mixer so that its internal sound engines can be mixed with the other synths. You could, as far as I'm aware, run the audio from the mixer into the circuit tracks and use its effects on the audio coming in, and then send the circuit tracks total audio out to the monitors. The only issue with these DAWless setups is there's no way to record anything unless you're going real old school and using a tape machine. A solution to this may be something like an MPC-1, which is effectively a music production studio in a box. It has its own internal sound engines, but you can also use it to control and record external synths, or you can play the external synths and record their audio into the MPC. In this diagram you can see that the MIDI is routed from the MPC-1 out to the other synths as per the previous couple of diagrams. But now the audio from the mixer runs into the MPC-1 before going off to the monitors, and as you can see, things can soon start to become fairly complex. That brings us neatly to the hybrid option. Here we combine both DAW based and DAWless based setups into one coherent system, where everything can communicate with one another and everything can be recorded, but you can leave the computer off and just jam on your hardware synths if you want, or turn the PC on and record your hardware synths and also your software synth plugins. As you can see, this combines all the connections of USB, MIDI and audio cables. Any MIDI controllers and the hardware synths are all connected to the PC via USB, but the MIDI controllers and hardware synths are, at the same time, connected by MIDI cables. The audio from the hardware synths again connects to a mixer, but now goes to the audio interface, allowing it to not only go out to the monitors, but also into the DAW on the computer, where it can be recorded. This setup also allowed you to record the MIDI data from your hardware, like the notes that you've played, and to send it back out to them. And there's now a couple of options on the microphone. It can either go directly to the audio interface and the sound recorded straight into the DAW, where you can then apply effects such as reverb, etc. Or if your mixer has built-in effects, the mic could go into the mixer with effects applied directly there. While we're talking microphones, one important thing here is phantom power. If you're using a condenser mic, you will need to make sure that either your interface or mixer has phantom power on whichever channels you want to connect the microphones, as they require a power source to work. Dynamic microphones don't require this. For example, both my mixer and my interface have a phantom power switch which turns on the power to the XLR inputs. The jack inputs do not receive any power. One other thing you may need to consider is, do you need both a mixer and an audio interface, as was just shown in the hybrid setup? Potentially no, depending on how you want to use your gear. If, for example, you had a drum machine, 2 synths and a microphone, you could connect these directly to the inputs on an audio interface that has 4 inputs and do away with the mixer, with everything being recorded in mono. This would also allow you to record audio to separate tracks in your DAW simultaneously, but you are limited to 4 instruments at a time. If you have more synths, you'd have to plug and unplug items as you want to use them and could never play them all together. Or you could get a mixer with a built-in USB audio interface and do away with the separate audio interface. The only issue with this setup is that everything is summed into one stereo output, and for example, all your vocals will be mixed in with the synths and you won't be able to separate them out or adjust them at a later date in your DAW. If there are no vocals though, this could be a viable option. Also to consider is that some synths, like my MODX8 Plus over here, come with a built-in audio interface. And if I wanted, I could run the mixer with all my other synths connected into the MODX and do away with my separate audio interface. The issue I would have with doing that though is that my vocals and my electric guitar would all be mixed in with my synthesizers and I wouldn't be able to separate them out afterwards. And that's why I use a dedicated separate audio interface with my synths coming from the mixer into 2 channels on the audio interface and my microphone and electric guitar going into separate individual channels on the audio interface. Ultimately though, it all depends on how you're going to be using your gear, and different workflows work for different people. Now, as I said earlier, there are many different ways that you can set up and connect a studio, and these examples just touch the surface of what's possible. And as your studio grows, so will all the connections, and you may find yourself needing additional equipment such as MIDI merge boxes, MIDI through boxes, USB hubs, or even MIDI patch bays. You can check out my dedicated videos on MIDI merge and MIDI through in the playlists on my channel. This, for example, is my current MIDI setup and does look pretty complicated, but there is method in the madness with this all enabling MIDI signals to flow around my studio and give flexibility on how I control everything. You can check out my Dark Art of MIDI video for further details. Then there's all my audio and USB connections, which again looks like a plate of spaghetti, getting all the audio and MIDI data out of my synths and other gear and into the computer, and out to my monitors, headphones and other speakers. Again, for further details, you can check out another of my videos on the dark art of audio and USB. So there we go. That's my take on the basic setup types that you could employ in your home music studio. There's tons more ways that you could arrange and connect stuff, but hopefully this gives you some simple insights to get you started, or indeed to help those that have started down this path and got a little lost along the way. Well, that's about it for now, but if you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell. And indeed, if you've got any questions on any of the content today or in my other videos, please leave a question in the comments and I will get back to each and every one to see if I can help. Indeed, any comments or feedback are highly, highly appreciated. But for now, I've been Graham, take care and catch you later.